Hello and good morning. Welcome to Leadership Unscripted. I'm going to give it one more minute just because people are still, I want to give people a second to join before we dive right in. Thank you for being here this morning. If you are joining us, please type into the chat box. We'd love to know you're here, where you're from, and if you have any specific questions, please do that. Tell us where you're from, why this topic interests you, and we're going to get started here in just a few seconds. We'll start introductions. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to Leadership Unscripted. I'm Kim Leifson, your host, as well as the founder and workforce strategist for Hiring Strategies. Leadership Unscripted really is unscripted. We want to answer your questions about the topic. We want this discussion to be guided by you. So please enter your questions and comments and thoughts and ideas into the chat box as we go along. I am very excited about our topic today. How workplace culture and leadership are directly impacting physical and mental health, and how the state of physical and mental health is impacting workplaces and employers and communities and families, and of course, individuals. I actually ran across an article this week, a Forbes article written by Dr. Tracy Bauer that spoke directly to this topic. And I was shocked to read a lot of this article, actually. But there were two things that really stuck with me in particular. The first one is 70% of people say that their manager has more impact on their mental health than their therapist or their doctor. And here's the kicker, and equal to the impact of their partner. Wow, that really blew me away. I mean, it makes sense because we are with our bosses and our teams more than we're typically with our partners. But that for some reason, that just really struck a chord for me. And 71% say that stress at work negatively affects their home life. So those of you that know me and have heard me speak before probably know my story. I grew up with a father who hated his job, and I knew he hated his job. And although he worked 16-hour days, 6 days a week, that man's work ethic is impeccable regardless. And there's a clue there, right? Anyway, what employer would allow someone to work 6 hours a day or 16 hours a day, 6 days a week? So when he was home, he was miserable, which meant that we were walking on eggshells. And it really left my mom to hold down the fort. And she was working part-time as well. And simply because they allowed those kind of hours, he wasn't around to parent. Now, don't get me wrong, he was very involved in my childhood. He was band booster president all 4 years of high school. He was my softball coach for 4 years. It wasn't that he wasn't there for me. It's that he wasn't there for the day-to-day stuff. He wasn't there for those deep conversations. He wasn't there for when things got really stressful at home, right? Except for that common, wait till your dad gets home fear of those days, right? I tell you this because this was not, nor is it still, unique to my family. The stress that's imposed upon by work and employers, it trickles down to family and kids and communities, and it creates this cycle of mental health challenges that ultimately are ending up back in the lap of employers. I think that's the piece that's missing here. My clients are reporting more demand for mental health services than ever before. Their sick leave banks are being depleted at rapid paces. Dr. Tracy Bauer in this article says that 78% of employees say stress is negatively impacting their work performance, which means lower productivity. And 35% of leaders are taking on more of the burden and reporting being stressed themselves. 42% of those leaders that are taking on more of that burden are saying that it's self-imposed, meaning they're feeling the pressure to perform and the buck stops with them, so they really have no choice. So the good news is, the flip side to this is that Dr. Tracy Bauer says that when people have positive mental health, 63% report they're committed to their work, and 80% say they're energized by their work. So it's almost like just that simple flip of the switch mentality has such a drastic impact. So all of that background and information to introduce you to our guest today, Dr. Adeola Mead. Dr. Mead is a physician, a consultant, and a coach that runs Vitality Team Workplace Wellness, where she identifies and comprehensively addresses the root causes and issues underlying individual and organizational health concerns. So welcome, Dr. Mead. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today. Please start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and why this topic is important to you.
Thanks so much for having me, Kim. I'm just really happy to be here to talk about this topic because it has a personal, impact for me. I also grew up in a home with very hardworking parents. My dad in particular was self-employed, and that meant there was a lot of pressure on him. And sometimes that would show up in, the way that we related as a family. And he was away a lot, traveling a lot. He was an author, so he wrote books. So a lot of his time was just directed towards breadwinning, and there were a lot of frustrations in dealing with work issues and concerns that kind of trickle down. So I remember that as a memory growing up as well. Again, not a unique experience, and always wanted to be a physician. That was just my number one goal and plan in life, and found naturopathic medicine as a great sort of way to express my lineage and my desire to be a healer and a physician, and doing so in ways that are comprehensive using natural medicine, and have worked in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Vancouver, BC, here in Seattle, so places where there's lots of tech, lots of high stress people, and have just found over the years that high stress, often related to work, leads to lots of inflammation in the body, in the brain, and mood issues. And then from that, chronic stress, chronic inflammation, and chronic disease. So I see a lot of burnout in my practice, and mostly like the mental and physical effects of burnout, not just the I'm tired, I don't really want to go to work today, I'm not getting along with my boss. It's more like I have sciatica. I am deeply depressed, and it's related to my work and some of the dynamics around that, or I am exhausted in ways I can't even explain, and it's not just something that a vacation fixes. So that's my background, is figuring out root causes and treating them comprehensively and naturally.
Awesome. Have you noticed, I'm curious, over the last, since the pandemic, it seems like the pandemic really fueled a fire when it comes to mental health, when it comes to physical health, because we all know that mental health leads to physical health, or lack of, right?
Right.
What have you seen specifically over the last 3 years? What's different? Is there something different than before the pandemic, or is it the same?
It's definitely different. People have had a chance to reevaluate what's working for them, what's not working for them. Working from home or working in a hybrid scenario has made it so that people can reflect on whether working in office with certain leadership or coworkers is beneficial to their mental health, physical health, or not. And when they realize that they have been on sort of a conveyor belt of stress and high workloads and maybe toxic culture, they decided they wanted to do something about it and started to demand more support in the workplace and more flexibility, more empathy, and more of a focus on well-being. So there's definitely been a shift. And also when you stop, you realize how tired you are and how
Right.
unsustainable the pace that you were working at
Mhm.
is. And
Mhm.
then you have a choice to make. So a lot of people are disengaging to a certain extent and realizing, or what they call quiet quitting, like I can only do so much and still maintain my mental health. So people are starting to become disengaged, especially when leaders are not listening, or want things to go back to normal, come back to the office, come back and make things the way they were before. But you can't recreate the past. Everything is moving forward. You can't undo 3 years of a pandemic and the realizations that have come from it. So everyone really does need to adjust and find a happy middle ground where everyone can thrive in the workplace.
Yeah. You said something about, exhaustion and it not being just something that a vacation will fix. We were talking about, I was talking with some colleagues about being tired and how it doesn't seem like the amount of hours of sleep that we get is not solving the exhaustion problem.
Mhm.
And I think I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a psychologist. I don't even pretend to be one on TV. I think that it's a deeper soul peace exhaustion. Like we need that peace. There's so much going on and we're all overwhelmed. And it's how do we find that center again, if you will. Um, Talk to me about the sorts of things you're seeing in your practice from a health standpoint, that are new or different post-pandemic.
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, like I said, exhaustion is a
Mhm.
big one, but in a different way. That's sort of like deep, deep, I don't know what I'm doing with my life sort of exhaustion. Like before, it was just that I'm busy, I need to keep going and stay vital and maintain my lifestyle because you never questioned it. This is just what you do, this is how it goes. But now people have realized, like, oh my goodness, this is beyond just continuing. Why am I doing this? Is it serving me? Does it, measure up with my values? So people are asking more questions, I think, and wanting to live a little bit more intentionally because they've had a chance to reflect. Um, so there's a lot of that, a lot of like anxiety and depression from realizing that the pace is not sustainable. And we have to remember too that a lot of people are dealing not just with work, but home lives and lives as global citizens that are very stressful right now, both domestically and internationally. There's like no end of things to worry about. And that weighs heavily on a lot of people in different demographics, and how they identify with different communities they're in. And those are things that you just don't leave at home. That comes with you, that comes to work, it comes to every interaction you have with anyone at work, or anyone that you serve as a client. So I think there's just a lot more awareness of the burdens that people have been carrying and a desire to change in ways that were not a priority before.
Mhm. So how are you tackling this now? What's been your response to this other than, helping them deal with the symptoms and solve these problems? What are you doing?
I'm advocating very strongly for self-care and for revitalization of self-care. Like, what does that really look like? And how can you make it sustainable and consistent? It's not,
Mm.
uh, I'll take a vacation in 6 weeks. It's not, I'll get my nails done on the weekend. It's not, I'll sleep when I'm dead. That's not self-care. So it's more like, because that's a lot of what our culture has been. It's just like go,
Right,
go, 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 go until you are absolutely out of resources and now you have to like scrape yourself off the floor.
right.
Um, so I'm advocating more for like daily doses of well-being practices. And that can be as simple as making sure you get breakfast, even if you don't
Yeah.
make the breakfast, making sure it's nutritious and nutrient dense so that you're fueled for the day, making sure you get enough rest. And that might mean like a phone fast and turning off your phone, putting it on airplane mode from 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and not turning it on for 12 hours or 14 hours so that you can take off of that, take off some of the many layers of stresses that we have, because we're always on edge, I feel like, as a culture. And like you're always attached to something and waiting for another shoe to drop or another communication to come in. Like you just never have time to rest.
And I think we have to be okay with, I think the flip side to that is there are going to be people that are upset that you didn't respond right away.
Yeah.
There are going to be things that don't get done. There are going to be things that slip through the cracks. There are going to be those things, but as a society, I think the piece that we have to come to grips with is those things need to occur if we want to continue on being productive, healthy, contributing members of society. But I think that's the hard part. I think the hard part is people don't want those consequences. They want both. They want that downtime, but they don't want things to slip through the cracks. They don't want people to be disappointed in them. They don't want, to put out that particular customer or client, for sure. So I think we have to make that connection and have a discussion about that. Is that part of what you're talking about?
Absolutely. Is just helping people step back for a second, to pause and step back and realize that the way things have been going is not sustainable. Like we can't continue this way. And that it's okay to, like you're saying, let some things slip through the cracks and just reprioritize, right? Let's just start with rocks and not with gravel, right? Let's start with boulders and rocks and not with gravel. And the boulders and rocks are really investing in your own capacity, right? As an individual. So that means getting sleep, making sure it's restful sleep, being well hydrated, making sure you're having a nutrient dense diet. It means exercising. It means meditation and mindfulness. It means community and intentionally building community that's supportive and understanding. It means learning how to communicate in a way that is both beneficial for you. So, your own self-talk. A lot of mental health is rooted in negative self-talk, right? And believing lies about ourselves that maybe we were told or we assumed, and just kind of reparenting ourselves in certain ways, and taking responsibility for the way we think and which thoughts we believe, and how we act on those, and how we process emotions and act. So all those things, and practicing those types of self-care invest in your bank of capacity. So now, if I'm well rested and hydrated, if I say nice things to myself, it spills out into how I interact with other people. It means that when I sit down to work, I'm not thinking of the millions of things that I haven't done. My mind isn't racing. I'm not hungry. I'm not in pain because I've taken good care of myself. So now I can really sit down and focus. I can get a lot more done in a shorter amount of time without stress.
Right. And I also think we forget sometimes that the brain needs that downtime to solidify information and to be innovative. I was reading something else last week about, we need the space to do nothing in order to innovate.
Yeah.
And we wonder why in the last 10 to 15 years, we've got classes on how to innovate. We're focusing on innovation. We never had to do that before.
Right.
Because it was happening naturally because we were giving ourselves that space. And I think not having that space anymore, we're seeing the impacts of that in so many different ways. I do want to stop for a second and invite people, if you are listening and you have questions or comments or ideas or thoughts, please go ahead and put those into the chat box. We want to answer those questions for you and fuel this discussion. So we invite you to participate. I also want to flip. We've been talking a lot about the individual and that self-care and how important that is. I want to flip for a second and start talking about employers, because that really is our mental health, our physical health affects employers, and our employers are affecting our physical and mental health. There's a relationship there that I think we're forgetting about. And so talk to me about Vitality Team Workplace Wellness and what you're doing inside organizations to talk about this topic.
Sure. So the most important thing I think an employer can do to improve the well-being of their team is to start listening, to ask questions, and then receive feedback in a neutral way, right? Because if you want to improve the employee experience, you need to learn exactly what that is. I think a lot of times, especially in the past and leading up to the pandemic, and often now too, I think leaders are often shy, nervous, or kind of unwilling to hear the truth, the raw truth about how people are experiencing the culture that the organization has created. Because then if you know something, then you might have to do something, and it might not be something that you're willing or able to do. But I think leaders really need to take that initiative to start asking questions and to start listening and to be ready to act on the feedback that they're receiving. So that's a lot of what we do, is just providing anonymous surveys. And it might sound very simple, but when you have an anonymous survey, then people feel like they can be honest. And when it's not coming from internal HR and not coming from the CEO, then they feel a little bit more open, because otherwise they might fear retaliation. They might, well, they'll know that this is me, and then things might happen at work that I don't really want to happen. I can't really be honest. So we as a third party provide sort of curated surveys to learn what leadership really wants to know, but then also give team members an opportunity to share more widely, right? So it's not just a check the box. It's more like, what are some of your big obstacles to work-life balance? And people say things like, it's my manager, my relationship with my manager, or it's childcare, or it's my own pressures on myself to be, 100%, 100% of the time, right? So then you start to learn more about the personalities on your team and ways that you can support people as individuals, because that's another thing we're seeing, is that there's no one size fits all well-being initiative.
Right.
Some people are going to gravitate towards having a stipend so that they can use resources for whatever they want. Some people are going to want more connection on the team to do things together based on topics that they've already indicated are of interest to them. Some people really want just one-on-one care and consultation, right? And apart from the rest of the team. But whichever level people choose to engage is beneficial for the entire team, and it's beneficial for culture, because then they know that leadership cares about them.
Right.
They're listening, they're acting, and they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is. And then you get a really, I think, positive return on investment on so many different levels, because now people are coming in engaged. They're being more productive because they've gotten one-to-one coaching on how to better prioritize rest and creativity, take care of mental and physical health, or they've connected as a team more, or they've finally had some resources to get well-being, I don't know, tools that they didn't have before, or care that they didn't have before. But either way, the return on investment is huge, because people are being heard and feeling valued.
Yeah. And I think the disconnect for employers is they aren't necessarily going to see on their P&L a direct correlation to wellness and profit. But I think what you will see is when you're doing that wellness, when you're providing wellness, when you're just listening, right? It doesn't even take investing in anything significant. It's just the care and the concern, I think. And there's lots of research that supports this. Right. But employers aren't seeking out that research. They just don't know, because they're too busy focused on their their product or their service, as they should be. But
Right.
that's why this discussion and education, I think, is so important for employers to understand that there is a connection. What are you seeing from your perspective? What are you seeing in organizations? What are you seeing organizations do? What are some of the things that they're doing to, besides just listening and caring, to increase employee wellness?
Yeah. Um, Bringing in, I'd say, outside training, personal development, well-being, topics that are of interest. So sometimes it's nutrition, bringing nutritionists in and talking about, meal planning, and or bringing in someone to do like a sound bath, or meditation,
Mhm.
or lead yoga or Pilates, or talk about um, different ways. Like I've been doing lots of speaking on self-care and how to implement self-care. So I think those are some things that are really helpful. It's just starting to bring in services and have well-being have a space and in as part of the organizational culture, right? So it's not just something that happens once a quarter or when people get very tired and sick and turnover is high and there's no one here because everyone is sick, but doing that a little bit more proactively, I think has been a good trend that
And
I'm noticing. Mhm.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, I want to reiterate the asking, right? What is it that I appreciate the examples, but I do think it is important, like you said, to ask. I heard about an organization that couldn't figure out what it was that was going on, and it happened to be transportation. Their
Yeah.
employees were simply didn't have their lack of transportation to get to work.
Yep.
And so they solved that problem and their productivity increased exponentially.
Yep.
So it's just asking, it's just reaching out and building that relationship with your team to know what are the things that you're interested in or that you need to be a full, productive, whole human being.
Right.
I think those are the questions that we need to be asking.
Yeah. And I think those are questions you ask on a human level. I think sometimes when we
Right.
go to work, you forget that I'm not just your boss. You're not just an employee here. I'm a human being having a human experience. I have good days, I have bad days. You have good days, you have bad days. And I think if we can just remember that and stay humble, really, and just recognize the dignity of the other person and, have them recognize our own, then we can just stop for a second and connect one to one on a human level. That's another thing that's helpful is just having leadership connect with team members all the time because we're pack animals, right? Like we thrive in community. And if, especially people who are just starting in the careers, a lot of people just came into the workforce during the pandemic and they get a new job and they never go into an office and they never see anyone. Like that is a very destabilizing experience. You feel so alone. And if you're spending most of your time on these projects for this organization and you feel disconnected, it's really hard to stay motivated to be very productive if you don't have that anchor person or persons that you can build relationships with. So I think a lot of it is building relationships, communicating, and just remembering that we're all human, right? And trusting that the people that you've hired want to do a good job, right? So you have to assume that you're hiring people who care to have this job and to, contribute to the organization.
Right. Which is really a whole different mentality than work has been in the past.
Mm.
It's really been transactional. You come to work, do the job, I'll give you a paycheck, we're good, right?
Right.
Whereas I think more successful, progressive, where we're at now as a society is we really want organizations and people to grow together.
Right.
And so that we need to change that focus. What are you seeing from the perspective of leaders' perspectives?
Yeah.
What's changed? Has anything changed from before the pandemic to now?
I'd say leaders are extremely stressed. I
Yeah,
think things have,
yeah,
like you were saying in that article, that a lot of leaders are just taking a lot on themselves because maybe they don't have the skills to rally and galvanize a team around a value, and
Yeah.
they don't have the skill set yet to be effective managers and leaders. So they just see a task that needs to be done. Maybe they haven't learned how to communicate effectively, or to delegate effectively, or to build relationship, or to listen effectively, all those things that are foundational for leadership. Maybe they're just very, very good at their job, but now they're in a leadership position, but they haven't been trained in leadership skills and coaching skills and all those things that require managing people. And now their workload is tremendous.
Yeah.
And they're so stressed trying to get it done. And, if they have supervisors and managers, that they have to report to, now they're getting it from both sides, right?
Yeah.
So I'd say there's a lot of stress in leadership, and that they're needing a lot of leadership development in different ways, and a focus on their well-being as well, because I know we all have the experience of either having a boss or knowing someone who has a boss who is not well in a lot of different ways. And it's not something that you can kind of keep to yourself, right? Like, if you are grumpy, if you're in pain, if you're dealing with a lot of stress, it's impossible to hide that. And it comes out in the way you communicate with people. It comes out in your expectations of people. And I think everyone suffers when a leader suffers. So it's really important to develop leaders in the context of well-being.
Yeah, which it creates that cycle, right? The cycle of the leader being stressed, overwhelmed, translates to the employees, translates to the families and the kids and the communities. And now we're back to, leadership again. It's because now those kids and the community members are going to work, and they're stressed. And now the employers have to deal with all the employees being stressed. And really, it could have started with them. So, yeah, I think leadership development is one of the big things that I'm seeing right now. Organizations don't want to spend the money on, but it's so critical to communities, to organizations, to families, to their place of employment. Again, that cycle, I think we need to start making that connection much more clear. Yeah, for sure. What's been the biggest aha for you in your learning about employee wellness?
Yeah, I think just recently, actually, I've learned that people want one-to-one individualized care. That it's very hard to get the care that we need in our typical healthcare system. So even if someone has an EAP access with their organization, they are, I think, typically grossly underutilized, right? So maybe 3 to 5%. So even if people know that they have access to all these different services, they just don't use them. And recently did a project with an organization where we offered one-to-one coaching for everyone on the team. So the people who were interested, and it was probably about 30% of the organization signed up for
Wow.
one-to-one coaching. And it was eye-opening because, they would fill out an assessment that gave us a good idea of where they were by way of their well-being. And then when we would meet, we'd have lots to talk about. Like, I've noticed seeing this, and this. Tell me more about that. Right. So there's always listening. So people need to feel heard and to be seen. So giving people an opportunity to express themselves and to share a bit of their struggles, and then giving recommendations, like, talk to your doctor about this, and this. This is what we're seeing here. Or you're probably dealing with a lot of hypoglycemia, and that's why you are tired and grumpy in the afternoon. I think your blood sugar isn't well managed. Or it sounds like you're not taking any breaks during the day, so you're crashing and exhausted and not able to function as well. So let's figure out, how can we make it so that you can pause and prioritize rest. So all those little, very individualized, coaching points and consulting points make a huge difference for people. And that's something that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but I'm seeing that is really valuable, because then you can go back and say, oh, my organization cares about me, and here's some things that I can do now to improve my well-being. And what do you do with your well-being? You take it to work, because that's where you spend most of your time, or you spend it, you lavish it on the people you love in your life and the people you spend your most time with. So that's something that has been surprising, is that there's this thirst for more individualized care, and even in the workplace, because I think our healthcare system can be really hard to navigate. And sometimes it could be something as simple as maybe someone says during a session, like, I'm having a hard time finding a therapist, which has been really, really difficult in the past few years, because therapists are dealing with their own overwhelm and burnout because of this mental health crisis that we've been having. And um, a lot of times people just don't know kind of where to go from there. So, like, we can figure out what your insurance carrier is, who is it like in your area that is, available for the kind of care that you need, and give you just like a short list of people to contact. So little, hacks to help people access care, I think makes a big difference, because just imagine, like, you're dealing with exhaustion, anxiety, and depression, and you need help. You go to access the help. No one will pick up your call. No one takes your insurance. Oh, it says they took your insurance and now they don't. You're exhausted, right? Already. So
Exactly.
now
Yeah,
to push through all those obstacles to receive care often doesn't happen for people. So then you kind of throw your hands up and give up. So that's why I think it's really important to figure out what individuals need, and then really just provide those resources. And often it's something really simple like that. But having someone who is in charge of well-being also makes a difference too. Um,
so
it can't be the CEO, and the HR, for example, has been overrun with well-being demands, I think, over the past several years. And it's not really human resources job to make sure that everyone reaches every high standard of well-being, right? There's limitations, and as there should be. But I think it's important to designate someone in charge of well-being in an organization.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's shocking to me that after offering that 30% accepted
Yeah.
that assistance. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
And then what's the other percentage that wanted to, but was too embarrassed or didn't feel comfortable reaching out and saying, yeah, no, I need help too. Because I do think there is a mental health, we also have a mental health stigma uh, in our country right now. And it's not okay, especially for men. I would be interested to know what percentage of that was men or women,
Mhm.
because I think men um, don't want to reach out for mental health
Yeah, for sure. It
support.
was a much smaller percent. I'd probably say of that 30%, probably 3 to 5% were men who reached out for help.
Yeah.
Um, and that's, kind of typical as well. But I think over time and building trust, everything's about building trust, right? So when people have someone who is in charge of well-being within an organization, and other people have benefited from, consulting with them or working with them, then eventually those who are initially hesitant might consider getting the kind of support that's been available to others. But it takes time, it takes building trust, and then also having opportunities where as a group people can learn, can share, can
Mm.
grow, so that some people feel very shy or hesitant to meet with someone one-on-one. It's it's a lot of pressure. But if there's a group opportunity, then maybe they'll put a question in a chat room or raise their hand or pass one into the suggestion box. So you just kind of have to meet people where they are. But I think absolutely just building trust, especially with men, because, as a society, men are supposed to be strong and stoic and not have problems. But I see that men in general suffer more because men tend to lack community outside of work, like just a basic social community. Women tend to be much better at having girlfriends and a sewing circle here, a book club there, a sister here, and a coworker there. But we tend to be good at building community and communicating. But men often are just not socialized that way. And there's a lot of stigma to sharing. So I think men in particular need more support and to feel safer in seeking help that they need. And also to be encouraged to build community, right? Build a supportive
Yeah.
community where you can be vulnerable and where you can share.
And I think it's interesting, just you saying that, Dr. Mead, men don't have community as much. They're not as good at the communicating and building those relationships. And yet they're the ones running our organizations. They're the ones running our country. They're the ones. We have this network of women who know how to do these things well, and yet we're not putting them in leadership roles. I mean, that's starting to change, but we still have a long way to go. And so I think there's opportunity to recognize that. I think just bringing that up and having that discussion is a good one to have, to make that connection. Women do these things naturally that men don't do naturally.
Right.
And so we need to promote those skills and utilize that knowledge base and those innate behaviors to create that in our organizations and our society. So great point.
Yeah. And then just to remember that our skill sets can work in harmony, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And should, like, my natural innate skills and strengths should be ways that I can serve the communities I'm in. So the more we promote women's natural strengths and skills and dovetail them with men's natural strengths and skills, the further we will go, right? But then just creating those safe spaces where men feel like they can grow in those skill sets, right? And not feel stigmatized because they're learning to communicate and they're building community and they're taking time for themselves. A lot of men just don't feel like that's allowed, like it's not a priority. They should be busy doing things that make them look very, very productive and successful. And then also just redefining success in a lot of ways, right? Like we push so hard for financial success, for power. And those are not bad things in and of themselves, but starting to redefine success as maybe a sense of peace, a sense of freedom, community, there's so many markers for success that we ignore that I think should come to the forefront if we're going to build a society that is collaborative and healthy.
Right. Great segue into, let's talk about some of those things that we can do as employers that will increase wellness, which then in turn increases productivity, right? I think you're right that there are some things that we do that seem counterintuitive, right? One of the things in the article from Dr. Brower, some of the solutions that they offer is to say no to too much work for yourself or your team. Just saying no to work because we're overbooked or we're overfull creates space for more innovation, creates space for problem solving, creates space so instead for that wellness, for that mental health, the physical health to flourish so that we can then take on more work or do something different. What are some of the things that employers can do right now to positively impact the mental health of their teams?
I would say promoting flexibility in schedules, right? As much as you can, it makes a big difference. And especially if workers have been remote and have been kind of strongly encouraged to come back to the workplace, that can breed a lot of resentment. And I'm not saying that you should sacrifice productivity to please different workers, but just work together and figure out what sort of schedule can help us be productive, maintain a healthy culture, and to continue building relationships, right? And if that's a hybrid, asynchronous, somewhat asynchronous, less meetings. So many meetings can be emails, right? And make the meetings very focused, purposeful, efficient as much as possible. Just all those little ways that you are reflecting as a leader that you care about this individual person, this team, and you're listening. So if it's flexibility, I think that can be really helpful. Again, listening to and having one-to-ones, I think make a big difference. So meeting people one-to-one and just checking in, not just on work and workload, even though that's really important, but again, making a human connection. How are you? How is your family? Did you just move here? Are you finding community? All of those things make a huge difference. They make a huge, huge difference. So prioritizing connection, I think, is really important. Prioritizing listening is really important. And then figuring out, I think a lot of times well-being resources are wasted. Like money is wasted and you don't get your return on investment, but you checked a box. Oh, we have an EAP. It's working. It's there. People know the number for it. So many times people call the number for an EAP and no one ever picks up. So, some of these resources are being wasted. So figuring out what your team needs and then strategizing to figure out how you can provide those needs in a way that really is cost effective. And it is absolutely possible. So those are some of the things. And also just leadership development.
Yeah.
I think it's an invaluable investment to
Right.
develop leaders in psychological safety, in communication, in just managerial duties of delegating and having healthy boundaries and modeling. When you're a leader, it means that people are watching you, they're following you, they're taking their cues from you. If you have a well-being initiative that's going on, make sure all the leaders are involved, or as many are involved as much as possible. And I mean, not every leader is going to be involved in every single
Right.
aspect of an initiative, but there should be some representation, because otherwise team members don't feel like they have permission to do it. It's like, oh, my boss isn't there, so they're working, so I should probably be too. They feel like they're going to be punished for taking advantage of a resource that's been provided. So it sends a lot of mixed signals when leadership doesn't also model the well-being that they're telling teammates to take advantage of. So setting healthy boundaries, saying no, all those things, and eating your lunch away from your desk, sending a note saying, I'm away from my desk for the next couple of hours. I need a mental health break. I'm going to eat lunch, contact me if you need to, but that's where I'm at. Like, that gives everyone this unofficial permission to take time for themselves when they need it. It can be little things, but just normalizing self-care, normalizing communication. I feel like I'm going on.
Look at those badges, right? The badge of honor was to eat at your desk while you did your lunch. Like, that's dedication, that's commitment.
Yeah.
No, that's burnout.
That's a recipe for burnout.
That is leading towards low productivity. That is leading towards them being out because they're sick or having a mental breakdown. We need to switch what we're rewarding and what our language around what we're supporting. And I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah. Also recognizing people's hard work. Like, a lot of people are just like against all odds doing their absolute best and just don't get recognition. And I don't mean like a promotion every month or something like that. I mean, just saying publicly, so-and-so is doing an incredible job at this. I'm so impressed and I'm really happy they're part of our team. Let us know if there's anything we can do to support you further because you're crushing this. Like, that makes you feel so good, and it gives you a sense of belonging, and then inspires others that when they're doing a great job, they'll also be recognized in that way, and it builds camaraderie on the team. But little things like that make a huge difference.
A simple thank you can go a really long way. There were a few other things in this article I want to touch on that people can take and do today. It's not hard. This isn't a huge investment of time and money. Things like training others, delegating, empowering, and ensuring teamwork and coordination with others in groups, right? It's just that creating that that sense. Even you can do it remotely. There's a way to create collaboration in a remote environment. It is happening. You can do that.
Yes.
Recognizing, you mentioned this, recognizing people's impact, just saying thank you. 1/3 of people say that their manager fails to recognize their own impact on others' well-being. So managers don't even understand the impact, which is why this conversation, I think, is so important. They don't understand that what they're doing, the examples they're setting, the models they're setting, how that is impacting their organization. They're one person, but it's very, very impactful.
Oh, yeah.
We should be emphasizing empathy because it has positive impacts on innovation, engagement, and retention. So just asking people how they're doing and tune in when they seem out of sorts, right? Do they need support? Ask them, what's going on and can you help? Another one is to connect people to those resources. A lot of these things you've already touched on, Dr. Mead, connecting people to the EAPs, to HR. 70% of people said that they would like their manager to do more to support mental health. So ask your teams, is mental health something that they need, and how can we offer that as bringing someone in once a week to just have conversations, right? I think that's would go a long way in a lot of organizations. They just need someone to connect with.
That's right.
Another one is give people a reason to care. When people feel a connection to purpose and a bigger picture, they feel better about their work. So really spending time creating a purpose for your organization and inspiring people to want to join in to be a part of that purpose. And give them a clear sense of what success means for their job and how it connects to the work of their colleagues and customers. This is a big one that I deal with on a very regular basis. A lot of times when people turn over, I'm finding that it's because there was a lack of communication about what was expected. There's some miscommunication about what this job really is versus what I said it was.
Right.
And so in the job descriptions, right? So being clear about that, creating connections, you already talked about that, providing a challenge. People don't want to come in and just check boxes and go out. There are some people that want that kind of work, and that's okay. But there are others that really want to challenge. They want to problem solve. So let's give them that and an opportunity to learn and develop. Give people choices, that being flexible, right? Autonomy, setting that expectation and then letting them decide how they reach that expectation rather than giving them all the steps in the process. And then the last one, of course, was take care of yourself. Yes. As a leader, right? We started this conversation by saying there's this cycle, and leaders, I don't think, realize how important that is. So they need to take care of themselves first. It's the putting the mask on the airplane, right? First, you have to do it yourself before you can take care of your teams, and your teams need you to take care of them. So figuring out what you need to create that centering piece in yourself to not be exhausted so you can support the team. What else? What am I not covering, Dr. Mead, that you think is really important to this topic? If there was one message you wish all employers would take to heart, what would that be?
Just investing in the well-being of your people is always a good choice. It's always going to be a good investment, and you'll always have a return on that investment. And making that a priority, I think, needs to be shouted from the rooftops, right? Like it's sort of like preventative health, right? Like you go in for your checkup every year, and for the most part, hopefully everything is healthy and normal. Maybe your doctor will give you some tips on staying healthy and normal. But if you don't go in, for a long time, then you start to be afraid of what will happen if you do go in. Oh, it's been several years and I haven't checked in. What if I have high cholesterol now? What if I'm dealing with, family issues that the rest of my family have been dealing with? Now you're hesitant to ask for help and you just never get that help then. But when you are consistently asking the right questions, listening, providing feedback, then you can maintain health in a sustainable way. So I'd say well-being is an important investment, and figuring out very specifically what your team needs and how to meet those individual needs in ways that are meaningful for them, right? So I think that would be it, listening. And just another side one, when you're talking about like bringing someone in to have, conversations and so people can feel heard. I think just creating safe spaces too.
Yeah.
A lot of times in organizations, people don't feel comfortable sharing. So something simple as creating a safe space, whether it's led by a professional or not, where people can just share feedback and have a little bit of space where they can let their hair down and let down their burdens and share vulnerably, just a safe space, and not just like a psychologically safe workspace, but just a safe space for conversation, I think can go a really long way. And maybe one more, like you asked for one now. I think I'm on
Oh,
my third.
Ellen, this is great.
I think when you're talking about articulating values as a leader so that teammates can start to rally around that value and make the work very directional, right? A lot of times people feel like aimless. What are we even doing? Why does it matter? But once you can articulate and continue to re-articulate values, then people know what direction they're going to be going in, and then they can fall into the line. But it doesn't always have to be a productivity value. It can be a human value of, we provide this service or this product because we care for our local community, right? So if that is a value, then there are lots of ways to meet that goal. So something like organizing volunteering or organizing donation drives and just making everything that you do as an organization feed into that value, I think reinforces that for all team members, that this is a space that is value driven, it's mission driven, it's meaningful, it goes beyond myself, because people really want that. They want to invest in an experience, contribute to an experience that goes beyond themselves. I think we're made for more than what we do every day and being in our little bubbles. So when you give people that perspective of what you're doing goes beyond you, it benefits this community, it benefits this cause, then it gives you a reason to wake up in the morning, especially if you resonate, connect with that cause. So those are some things to
I
think
think that's a
about.
great place to end this conversation because we're all looking for that reason to wake up in the morning, right? And I think not just your employees, but you as an individual, as a leader in an organization, if you have that reason to wake up in the morning, that's going to spill out into giving your employees a reason to wake up in the morning. So again, putting that mask on first, taking care of yourself as a leader will allow you to then take care of the people around you. So thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Mead. I appreciate this. This was a great informational conversation about just small things people can do. It doesn't have to be, again, this big comprehensive program. Just do one thing. And maybe that one thing is starting with yourself, right? Doing the self-care for yourself, setting boundaries, learning to set those boundaries. I think that's fantastic. Again, Dr. Mead is a doctor. She takes care of individuals, also takes care of organizations. Please reach out to her if you want to ask questions or get some ideas. She's available. We're going to put her LinkedIn contact into the chat box for you. And Hiring Strategies is also here to support you with leadership development, with processes and systems to help you create a culture that's going to attract, engage, and keep top performing people. And that includes wellness. So thank you again for being here. If you have any questions, please reach out. Dr. Mead, it was my pleasure, and I hope that we get to do this again soon.
Likewise, thank you for having me.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.